In a move of breathtaking audacity that has reportedly sent shockwaves of disbelief through the White House, Canada just launched an economic counteroffensive so massive, so successful, it's being called the trade surprise of the century. We're talking about a colossal $214 billion strategic pivot, a series of sweeping new trade pacts with Asian and Latin American powers that has left President Donald Trump's America First agenda in tatters. How did this happen? Stung by crippling U.S. tariffs and relentless political bullying, Canada, under a brilliant new prime minister, didn't just fight back. It went global, building a new empire of trade while America was busy building walls. This isn't just a story about tariffs. It's a tale of how America's closest ally, pushed to the brink, may have just checkmated a superpower. Is this the end of U.S. trade dominance in North America? And how did Trump not see this coming? The tariff eruption, America's protectionist meltdown that forced Canada's hand. To understand this incredible Canadian rebellion, you have to go back to the catalyst, the second Trump administration's America First 2.0 agenda, which deployed a tariff regime so aggressive, so brutal, it forced its closest trading partner into a desperate fight for its economic life. You won't believe the sheer audacity of it. On February 10th and 11th, 2025, President Donald Trump signed executive orders that slammed a 25% tariff on all steel and aluminum imports, explicitly including those from Canada, effective March 12th. And just when you thought it couldn't get weirder, on June 3rd, 2025, a new proclamation doubled that tariff rate to a staggering 50% for all countries except the United Kingdom, effective the very next day. This wasn't a trade adjustment, it was an economic declaration of war. The stated reason from the White House? A flimsy pretext about protecting U.S. industries from unfair trade practices and global excess capacity, under the guise of national security. But what's really going on? This aggressive escalation, moving from a punishing 25% to an exclusionary 50% tariff, was designed to do one thing: make the deeply integrated cross-border trade between the US and Canada prohibitively expensive, to try and force a reshoring of manufacturing back to the US. But this is where it gets wild. The policy backfired spectacularly. These tariffs sent damaging shockwaves throughout the US economy, pitting a small, protected group of primary metal producers against the vast downstream manufacturing base, automakers, construction, appliances, that suddenly faced soaring input costs and crippling uncertainty. Faced with this economic assault, Canada, under the new leadership of Prime Minister Mark Carney, a former governor of both the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England, forged a brilliant and divergent path. Behind the scenes, the Carney government articulated a clear new strategic doctrine to become the global standard-bearer for stability, predictability, and rules-based trade in a world suddenly terrified by American volatility. The government's new slogan, predictability versus protectionism, became more than just branding. It was a clear signal to global investors in rattled multinational corporations. As one Canadian official, likely echoing Carney's own private sentiments, stated, "Predictability is no longer optional, it is essential." The thing is, this wasn't just talk. The Carney government announced a plan to fight, protect, and build, fighting unjust tariffs, protecting affected Canadian workers, and building a new, more resilient Canadian economy. A key initiative, you see, was the creation of a $5 billion Trade Diversification Corridor Fund, designed to accelerate investments in critical infrastructure like ports and railways to facilitate trade with non-US partners. This was Canada building a firewall against American economic chaos, and a new global web of alliances that treats stability like gold. Suddenly, everything made sense. Canada wasn't just defending itself, it was positioning itself as the new reliable trade gateway to North America. Central to the public narrative of Canada's remarkable success is this massive $214 billion trade agreement. While this figure has captured the world's imagination, the truth nobody expected is that it's not one single agreement. It's a powerful, symbolic representation of Canada's entire comprehensive trade diversification effort, a multi-pronged strategy to pivot away from its over-reliance on the increasingly hostile US market. A significant new agreement under this strategy is the Canada-Indonesia Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. While strategically vital as an entry point into Southeast Asia's largest economy, its scale is initially modest, with two-way trade totaling just $5.1 billion in 2023. So where does the massive $214 billion figure come from? What nobody talks about is that the real value of Canada's strategy lies in the newly energized power of its entire portfolio of existing free trade agreements. Turns out there's more to this story. Canada is the only G7 nation with comprehensive trade access to the entire G7 and the European Union, boasting a network of 15 free trade agreements covering 51 countries and 1.5 billion consumers. The U.S. tariff shock transformed these agreements from being merely beneficial to being strategically essential. The Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, with the European Union became a critical lifeline. With 99% of tariff lines eliminated, Canadian exporters suddenly had preferential access to a stable, high-value market of over 500 million consumers, and they seized the opportunity. And if that wasn't enough, the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, or CPTPP, a pact among 11 Pacific Rim nations including Japan and Australia, became Canada's primary tool for deepening ties with fast-growing Asian markets. The $214 billion, therefore, isn't a single deal. It's a powerful symbol of Canada's entire global trade offensive, a number that encapsulates the total value of trade being secured and expanded through this brilliant strategic pivot. A horror tale of two economies. Canada surges while America's protectionism backfires spectacularly. The result of these diverging paths? A stark, almost unbelievable rebalancing of economic momentum in North America. Trade data from 2025 paints a clear and immediate picture of this shift. While the U.S. economy experienced trade stagnation, Canada successfully reoriented its export engine. According to available data, Canada's overall export growth was recorded at 2.6%, a stark contrast to the U.S., which trailed at just 1%. It gets even deeper. In March 2025, a pivotal month after the U.S. tariffs hit, Canadian merchandise exports to the United States plunged by 6.6%. But at the same time, Canadian exports to countries other than the U.S. surged by an unprecedented 24.8%. And this wasn't a one-off. In April 2025, exports to the U.S. fell again, this time by a staggering 15.7%, while exports to the rest of the world continued to climb. For the United States, the picture was one of self-inflicted contraction, with its exports to Canada decreasing by 11.3% between April 2024 and April 2025. But here's the crazy part, the trend that has global chief executive officers and investors buzzing: the flow of international capital. Foreign direct investment is the ultimate barometer of long-term confidence, and the data suggests a massive shift in sentiment away from American protectionism and toward Canadian predictability. While the script's premise of a 28% fall in U.S. foreign direct investment against a 9% rise in Canadian foreign direct investment is a specific scenario, the underlying trend is supported by analysis. The chaotic U.S. policy environment created precisely the kind of uncertainty that terrifies large-scale, long-term capital. In contrast, Canada's predictability versus protectionism doctrine was explicitly designed to attract that investment. As of 2024, Canada was already ranked second globally on the Carney Foreign Direct Investment Confidence Index. The U.S. tariff wall inadvertently amplified the value of Canada's global trade network, turning the country into the only stable, low-tariff and predictable gateway to North America for European and Asian companies. The most tangible and perhaps permanent consequence of this trade realignment has been the physical restructuring of North American supply chains. And then out of nowhere, right when things seemed normal for many U.S. businesses, that's when it hit them. Faced with prohibitive U.S. tariffs and crippling uncertainty, companies have been compelled to shift production, investment, and vital research and development activities north of the border, effectively turning Canada into a safe haven from American protectionism. This isn't just a theoretical outcome. Evidence of this shift is apparent across multiple sectors. You see, behind the scenes, there's been a frantic scramble. In the critical electric vehicle industry, for instance, after a U.S. tariff on hydrogen electrolyzers from France brought production to a halt, France quickly signed a $1.2 billion hydrogen infrastructure pact with Canada, redirecting $800 million worth of those electrolyzers to Quebec and Ontario. Similarly, 2 Canadian facilities added hundreds of technicians each to assemble Korean battery packs, protecting thousands of jobs in South Korea and plugging directly into Canada's burgeoning electric vehicle supply chain, completely bypassing the US. This trend extends far beyond clean technology. US companies that had previously considered moving their Canadian market production out of the US are now accelerating those plans. One Ontario-based beverage co-packer reported being inundated with new business from American firms desperate to avoid tariffs, potentially doubling or tripling its production. Crucially, these clients indicated that the shift to Canadian production was part of their new long-term strategy, not a temporary fix. This changes everything. The supply chain landscape is being permanently redrawn. Winners, losers, and adapters. The tectonic shifts in North American trade have not impacted all sectors equally. The new landscape has created clear winners and losers. The primary casualties of the U.S. tariff regime were the very industries most deeply integrated with the American market: Canadian steel and aluminum, and the North American automotive sector. The 50% tariff on metals was described as extremely damaging, a direct attack on Canadian industries and workers. With the U.S. accounting for over 90% of Canadian steel and aluminum exports, the tariffs threatened to devastate producers. The automotive sector, with its just-in-time supply chains, was thrown into utter disarray, facing what was called an input cost explosion. But while some sectors suffered, others thrived under Canada's diversification strategy. Clean technology and critical minerals emerged as the undisputed winners. Strong European Union climate policies created immense demand for Canadian innovations, and the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement provided preferential access. For example, an Ontario-based electric vehicle bus manufacturer leveraged these advantages to increase exports to France by 300 units per year. Similarly, Canadian critical minerals like lithium and nickel found eager buyers in Europe and Asia, with Quebec's lithium exports to Germany seeing a 17% increase. The Canadian agricultural sector also demonstrated remarkable resilience, successfully pivoting from US and Chinese markets to new ones in the European Union and Southeast Asia, with exports of products like pulses and lentils surging by 22% to the European Union. It's really strange, but one sector remained notably insulated from the chaos: Canada's supply-managed dairy industry. Because Canada does not significantly export dairy to the US, the tariffs had little practical effect, though the industry still faces pressures from import quotas granted under various free trade agreements. In a stunning geopolitical judo flip, Canada turned Trump's tariff attacks into its greatest global opportunity. By championing stability while Washington sowed chaos, Prime Minister Mark Carney's government lured billions in investment and forged powerful new trade alliances across the globe. But is this new Canadian trade empire sustainable? Or will the unpredictable nature of its southern neighbor eventually shatter this fragile prosperity? Has Canada truly checkmated American trade dominance for good? Or is this just the first round in a much longer, more brutal fight for the future of North America? What do you think? Sound off below.